Time with Stephanie Story.
I am art historical novelist Stephanie Story. Welcome to my show, Storytime. This is where I get to talk to other writers about their passions and their process. I am really fascinated by the conversation that we're going to have today. It is with debut novelist, so her very first novel just came out on September 7th. It is called Paper Airplanes, a novel. It is about the anniversary that we have all been living through recently, 9/11. It is about 9/11. We will get to that. But welcome to the show, Tabitha Forney.
Thank you, Stephanie. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I have to start with, so we booked this interview last minute, so I haven't gotten to read the whole book, but I have gotten to read the prologue. Woo! You start off with, and like at the beginning of the book, it says it may trigger things. You go right to it. Tell me a little bit about, one, what the book's about, and two, that decision to start where you start in that prologue.
The book is about a woman who loses her husband on 9/11. He is on the 101st floor of the North Tower, and his name is Daniel, and Erin is the protagonist, and she's in Mallorca on a girls' trip on the day that it happens. And the story is more her story about her grief and her process of going through all of the regret and the fact that they were in a fight and they hadn't spoken in a couple of days and all those sorts of things that happen to every married couple all the time. But this time just happened to be the last time that she saw him. And so just, it's really her journey of coming through that and coming out on the other side. And I decided to start with that prologue because I went to, well, my husband was in the tower. We should get that over with. He was on the 85th floor of the North Tower at the time that it happened, and he was able to come down 85 flights of stairs and escape. So he got out. And so this is kind of my what if story. Like, what if he had been on the other side of that bright line in the North Tower? There was a bright line between survivors and those who did not survive. And it was around the 92nd floor. So if you were on the 91st floor below, I believe you had a 99% chance of surviving. If you were above, if you were 92 or above, you did not survive. And so he was 6 floors away from that very bright line. And so, of course, you have all these what if scenarios that flood your head. And he survived. We went on with our lives. We had children. We, moved back to Houston, which is where he's from. But always, 9/11, especially every year when it comes around, it's difficult, and we think about it, and we're grateful that he got out, but we're also sad of, all the people who didn't. And in September of 2015, we went to the 9/11 Museum and Memorial, and it was shortly after it had opened, maybe within a year or so. And it was just so impactful. It was an audio visual experience. You walk in, you hear Katie Couric on the Today Show and all the other anchors with all of their, gasping, and they didn't know what was going on either, and we were all experiencing it together at the same time. And then you see, of course, all the artifacts, and there's all of these interactive displays. And one of the displays was somebody who was, I don't remember if he was on 101, but it was one of those floors where he was high up, where you wondered what happened to him. Was it instant, or was he one of the people who fell? And I do call them people who fell instead of jumped, because I feel like jumping implies a choice that they did not have. Clearly, they didn't go to work that day intending to jump out of a 100-story building, right? So the other part of the museum that was so impactful to me was walking kind of towards the back. You get to an area that is kind of dedicated to those who fell, and you go around like a privacy door where you kind of have to wrap around, and there's warnings to those who enter this little alcove that the images could be disturbing, and they are disturbing. They're the people who fell to their deaths. And I was just struck by the fact that they're hidden away, they're tucked away, not for everybody to view, which is as it should be. But it's also really sad that people don't really talk about it, and they don't really kind of acknowledge what happened to those people who fell. So as a writer, I went to the dark place, and immediately after the 9/11 museum visit, I went straight to the airport because I was just happened to be flying back to Houston, and I started writing Daniel's story, the prologue, at the airport.
It is an extraordinary read, just that prologue, and then I have to read more because it takes you into the mind in a moment that none of us can know, because everybody who experienced what Daniel experienced. So for the readers at home who haven't read it yet, this is the protagonist's husband who is trapped in the World Trade Center after the plane's hit, and he can't get out, calls 911, and things progress. You can't know, and yet as writers, it's our job to imagine. But how difficult was it to imagine being in the, did you go back to interviews with people who had been near the floors? Was your husband near enough to it to have a sense of that heat? Like, did some of it come from talking to your husband? Did you look at other interviews? How did you do that research in order to be able to imagine it?
Yes, I talked to my husband a lot, mostly about the layout of the building and, where the stairwells would have been, what it would have looked like, and having him read it and tell me if anything didn't ring true about it, which was probably really hard for him. He was 6 floors, well, no, I'm sorry. From where Daniel was, he was 16 floors below because he was on 85. So I read many accounts of victims. I looked at so many photos on the internet, both of the building before and, well, not really after, because there was nothing to look at after, but just all of the accounts of survivors. There were people who were closer to the line who more experienced what it was like. And actually, part of the prologue also comes from my husband's boss, who was at the time sitting in his office, which faced north. And he actually saw the plane coming towards them. And he was on the phone talking to his wife. And he was looking at this plane saying, that plane is really low coming from LaGuardia. He thought it was coming from LaGuardia, but LaGuardia it was not. It's coming from Boston. But he thought it was coming from LaGuardia and had just taken off, and that's why it was so low. But then it didn't start going up like he expected, and he actually saw it coming towards their building, and he like threw the phone down and jumped away from the windows, because that's your instinct, even though that wasn't going to do anything if a plane was coming towards you. And he actually saw the pilot's dark hair, and that pilot was Muhammad Atta.
That's the kind of stuff that in that prologue you're right there, and you're right there with you. Which, and this comes out right at the 20th anniversary when we are all watching this stuff. It's really interesting, sort of the perspective that's changed over the last 20 years for everybody, I think, looking back on this story. But what did writing this do for you to change your perspective? I know it had to have been like you said, it's your what if story. It's what if your husband had not survived that day and what you might have lived through. How did writing this story either change your perspective of what happened that day, or the perspective of widows and widowers who were left grieving for the last 20 years? How did writing this, did it change you, or did you just put everything you had experienced into it? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, it definitely did change my perspective, which is, I guess, what I went into it trying to get is empathy for what happened and an understanding of what happened. They're the people I really wanted to honor, the victims first and the victims' families and loved ones. And hopefully I did. It was difficult to write the prologue and keep it in the book. A lot of people thought that I should take it out because it was too disturbing, but I really just felt like that wouldn't do justice to the people who went through that. And that was my main goal, is to try to understand and to impart to the world what they went through, because I felt in a way like we owed it to them.
When you think about the readers of this book, because it's beautifully written, I mean, even the very difficult prologue to read is beautifully written. I'm very much looking forward. I mean, as weird as that sounds, to be looking forward to a book that I know has a lot of grief and overcoming death in it. It is, it seems like it is going to be a hopeful, my hunch is hopeful book by the end is how I'm feeling about it already. So who were you trying to reach? You were talking about, I wanted to honor the victims. I don't know that the victims have it in them to read this, but who were you trying to reach, and who were you trying to tell this story to? Why did you feel like it was important to tell this story, and who were you trying to reach with it?
Yes, I was definitely not trying to reach the victims, because you're right. I don't know that they'll read this, and I am not sure that they should, because it might be too triggering. But I felt like it, for the victims and their families, and loved ones, I felt like it would be difficult for them to go there as a fiction exercise, right? It would be very difficult. I mean, they could maybe write a memoir of their own experience, but I feel like it would be difficult for them to go into that space that I went into. But I wrote it for all the people who were not there and did not experience it, but needed to know more about it. My husband talks about his experience a lot and talks about how people really need to know what happened, and people really need to empathize with the people that it happened to, because it's just an important story to get out, and it's important that history is recorded by the eyewitnesses. And also, so many people show an interest in his story, even to this day. He's been on multiple news shows and NPR, and like he gave a talk at the Lone Star Flight Museum here, who has a 9/11 memorial, and there were reporters everywhere, and they all interviewed him. And his story is out there from the beginning. It's been out there because he wrote down his experience right after it happened, a few days, and it went all over the world at the time. And so from his experience, I knew how much intense interest there is in this topic, and in understanding what happened on 9/11. There is a lot of interest, and so I really wrote it for the rest of the world to honor the people who went through it.
Now, how long did you're sitting at home, you're not in contact with it, like you're in your real life, because then I'm going to ask a question about how that translated into creating a character. In your real life, you're sitting at home, you're watching the news, you see this happen. How long were you in limbo about whether your husband was safe or not?
Okay, so I actually was not at home. I was actually in London. I had just taken the red eye on September 10th to London for work, and I was supposed to meet some girlfriends for the weekend on Thursday. Obviously, they never came. So I was stuck in London, and I had talked to my husband that morning as he was like getting up and getting ready to go to work, and I had just landed and was about to go to lunch. And then I went to our office. The small company I was working for at the time had a one-person office in London. And so I was in the office when the first plane hit. And my colleague there, a British man, was reading his email. And he leaned back and he goes, "Oh my God, a plane just hit the World Trade Center." And he was just like, kind of like, just kind of like a smile that's not really a smile on his face. Like, "Can you believe that?" And I looked at him. I don't tell this story very often, so I'm getting a little emotional. And I said, "My husband works there." And he was like, of course he had no idea. And so that started it. And so after that, it was 2001, obviously. So it wasn't, redundant like it is now. And who knows what internet would be like if that happened again, but all the sites were crashing. Couldn't get on the internet. And we didn't have a TV in our tiny little office. And he was getting emails, and we were emailing our colleagues in New York, and we were just waiting for their missives to us. And finally I looked at him and I said, "I can't do this anymore. We got to go find a TV." So he took me down and we found a pub, and I was sitting in a pub after, it was probably 2:00 in the afternoon, something like that. And people were drinking pints and smoking, and it was just nauseating. And Tower One was, sorry, I missed a step there. I said, "I can't do this anymore," right after he got an email from somebody in our New York office that just said, the whole email was, "WTC2 just fell." And I looked at that line on his email, and I was just, as we all were, like, how can the World Trade Center fall. What is he talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I have to find a TV. And so it was just crazy to get it like in 3 words, basically. And so we went to a pub and one was still standing. And I wasn't completely sure which one my husband was in, which is a little embarrassing to admit, but I was pretty sure it was the one with the tower on top. And so I was holding tight to that. And also my husband was a trader. So he would go up to the office, then he would come back down after he did his tickets or whatever he had to do. And he would go to the NYMEX, which was in the World Financial Center, which was like across the West Side Highway. And I knew that he went there before 9 o'clock when the markets opened, but I didn't know exactly when. So I was like, where was he? Was he in his office? Was he already down and out? Was he at the World Financial Center? Was he in the elevator? Where was he? I had no idea. And so I didn't know if he was in the building, and I didn't know if that was his building. But then shortly thereafter, 30 minutes or whatever, that building fell, as we all know. And I watched it go down floor by floor by floor, just like Erin does. So our stories are very similar in that respect, because Erin was in Mallorca and she watched her husband's building go down at a pub, at a bar. So at that point, I just kind of went into shock, I think. And my colleague kind of probably looked at me and saw that I was turning green. We quickly left the pub and he navigated back to my hotel. And amazingly, I don't even remember what time this was. I don't remember how long it took. I don't remember how far away my hotel was. I remember very little except like snapshots of like a normal London life and people driving and hailing cabs and walking their dogs and crossing the street, and thinking, how can all these people be doing normal things? Like, it just did not compute. And we got to my hotel at some point and I just marched up to the counter and said, I'm in room 613. Do you have any messages for me? And she said, I have a terrible British accent, but she said, oh yes, it's just arrived. She says, your husband is fine. And I was like, okay, thank you very much. And like, I think my colleague, like, I think I just like started crying. And I think my colleague, his name was Ian, grabbed the paper and he was like, thank you very much. So yeah, I don't remember your question. I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but that's where I was when it happened. That was my story.
Wow. What strikes me, a couple of things are, you are probably one of the only people equipped to write the novel that you just wrote. Because if you'd actually lost your husband, as you said earlier, you could not have gone there in a fictional way. But if you didn't have that stretch where you didn't know, then you probably would not have been as connected to the material and have a place of real empathy and understanding for what happened.
Yeah.
How was it?
Absolutely right.
Painful, or was it cathartic to write it? Do you know what I mean? Because you had to go back and revisit all of your own fear in that moment and those particular details of that moment. Was it painful? Was it cathartic to do, or was it both?
I think it was both. I mean, I just started almost tearing up. I was tearing up talking about it. So clearly there's still a lot of emotion there. I mean, that was clearly one of the most emotional days of my life. And I think it was both. There were definitely moments where I was just tapping away, just tears streaming down my face. So, and I definitely identified with Erin, at that point. And then of course, as you do with your characters, you throw a lot of, can I say bad words on this? You throw a lot of shit at them. And you don't want to, because you like your characters and you don't want to have to throw shit at them. But I threw shit at her that I didn't have to deal with. So poor Erin did have to deal with it. And her sweet, wonderful husband had to deal with it as well. And, I regret that, but that's literature and that's diving into the deep stuff. So
yeah, that's part of fiction. That part you gotta do. You gotta be throwing shit at her. You just have to do it. That's part of it.
Absolutely. It's not fun, and I wasn't really good at that. And somehow, I guess because I wasn't good at it and I knew I wasn't good at it, I seem to really throw a lot of shit at my characters now. and people say that, well, this one obviously just by the material was going to be a tearjerker, but I really need to write a comedy or something just to kind of balance that out. Like throw fun shit at my characters instead of like
Okay,
horrible shit.
This is actually going to be one of my questions. So this is your debut that was published.
Yes.
Now, I look at that prologue and I go, my hunch is it's not your first trip around the rodeo. You're an awfully skilled writer.
Thank you.
So why this story? Obviously, you had a lot that needed to be told, and that's why it's the debut, and you finally put it out there. But how did it feel to actually write something and put it out into the world as a novel for other humans to read? And now they are taking it home and they're reading it. How has that experience? I know it's brand new. It is brand new. You may not have heard from people yet. Do you have an idea of how it feels to have sent this thing that's all you out into the universe?
Yes, I do. And it was incredibly scary at first. I mean, all through the whole publishing process, I kept thinking every time there was like the new stage that I had to go through and the new, this round of corrections and the cover and all of, the design of the pages. I had such imposter syndrome. And I felt like I was just at any moment I was going to pull it back and I was going to be like, no, I can't do this. I can't do this. It's too hard. Like people are going to hate it. People are going to hate me for writing it. Like, so I definitely had imposter syndrome. And I would say I did have readers along the way who encouraged me. So that was really great. When I got the arcs and I handed them out to some friends, and I sent one to my mother-in-law, gave one to my mother-in-law, which she's a big reader. And so that was a moment, like, not only is she my mother-in-law and she's going to read like my inner thoughts, but she's a good reader. Like she's a critical reader. And so, and she, had really good feedback for me. She loved it. And so I feel like that was a big hurdle. And, a lot of friends and family have come back to me, but you always wonder, like, are they just saying that because they're my friends or, they're my family? It's my sister. Of course, she's going to say she loves my work. So what's really been gratifying is to see acquaintances out in the community who send me notes. I get a lot of texts in the last week. I'm getting a lot of shout outs on social media and a lot of texts of like saying just wonderful things. My reviewers, the people who wrote blurbs for me, like for example, David Eagleman, he is kind of a friend of mine. And when he told me how much he loved the book, I was like, are you serious? Are you sure? Like, really? Like, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. Like, I will get other blurbs. And he was like, no, like, really, I really love it. So yeah, so it's very gratifying. And I'm so glad I went through with it. So to all the writers out there who are like hesitating because they're afraid to put their stuff out there, I totally get it. You feel very vulnerable. It's like turning yourself inside out and asking people to judge you. But it's so worth it if you believe in your work and if you have done your very best. Then you can go out there confident and take anything that people throw at you, even if it's not as glowing. You did your very best. And there's that whole thing, I know you've heard this about putting, it's your baby and then you put it out into the world and it's not your baby anymore. It now belongs to the world. And so people are going to interpret it as they want to and as they need to and through their own lens, and everybody interprets everything through their own lens. And so you have to let it go. And so it's gratifying, but at the same time I have to let it go.
Yeah, you do. You have to let it go. People are going to have opinions, but I predict a lot of those opinions will be very good because your writing's fantastic. And seriously, that opening prologue, it's breathtaking, but it is also, you can't possibly put it down. It's physically, you couldn't. It's impossible. It is a really compelling piece of literature, just that opening bit that I've managed to read.
Thank you. And just there hearing that, and I have heard from other readers, the way they take it in is they read it. And I can never know that, as you can never read your book as a first time reader. No. You can never have that experience. And I was actually watching a documentary of Pink Floyd last night, of all things, from 2003. I think it was David Gilmour who said, I will never be able to sit down with a pair of headphones and listen to The Dark Side of the Moon and experience it like everybody else in the world experienced it. And he had such regret on his face that he couldn't do that. And I thought, that is exactly how authors feel about their books. They can never take it in that way. So, it took me years to write it, and you read it in 20 or 30 minutes. So I appreciate that perspective because I can't see it.
So are you going to go through this again? Because this is such a personal story. It comes from obviously your own grappling with a huge what if in your life. And this hugely, this moment, it's such a personal thing. Are you going to go down the novel road again? And this time, if you are, what are you going to do? It's going to be a very different, every novel is a different experience. I hate to tell you that. They're all different anyway. But what are you going to, what's your plan?
I already have one, actually. And it's a long, convoluted story as to why I have another book ready to go. Actually, I have two. As you know, as writers, we always have one in the drawer, or two in the drawer, or six in the drawer, as it should be. And the first one I wrote completely may stay in the drawer forever. We'll see about that. But I have another one that I really want to go out into the world. And now I'm emboldened to let it fly. And it actually was related to this book at one point. So in 2017, I got an agent who wanted me to bigger the book, make it bigger. And so I gutted a lot of it. I brought in a new character. I'll spare the sob story of what happened with me and the agent, but it didn't work out. And I had a moment of realization sitting in the bathtub one night that I needed to take it back apart, restore Paper Airplanes the way it was. But then I had this new character who I absolutely adored and who readers loved. Some of my, early feedback readers loved Rosie. And Rosie is actually the 911 operator in the prologue who talks to Daniel. And she also is in a later chapter, she's driving a fire department truck out of Ground Zero, and Aaron sees the truck. And so she's got two very small cameos in Paper Airplanes, but that character has her own story, and it's a braided narrative with her and her mother. And I love it. And it's totally different. It has nothing to do with 9/11. It's actually in 2000 is Rosie's story. So before 9/11 happens. And her mother Mary is a 1970s Welsh housewife stuck in Staten Island with two kids and a controlling, abusive husband. And I love Mary because 1970s housewife, she wants to be a singer, but she's stuck in Staten Island, and she's trapped. And so that's my next book. And I'm just trying to figure out how it's going to get out into the world, and I'm working on it.
Tabitha, this has been an enlightening conversation. I had a lot of other things that I was going to ask you about, but then I just got wrapped up in your story. And I was really quite floored by the prologue. I told my own husband before this interview, he was like, who are you talking to today? I'm like, she's this woman named Tabitha. And let me tell you, I read her prologue and I'm like, I got to get back to that book. So I got to get done with the interview so I get back to it, because that was amazingly done for really, really difficult content, and it was really so I'm very much looking forward to it. I think everybody at home should read it and get a glimpse into a what if would have happened if things.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
it's really great to hear that. Obviously every writer strives to have that reaction in the readers, so I love hearing it. Thank you.
Good luck with it.
Thank you.
The book on the shelves with the readers and the people, and it's a whole new world out there, Tabitha. Enjoy it.
Thank you so much. I can never go back.
You can't.
It's out there. You can't take it back.
You're done. You're done. It's out there. Just live with it.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me. And I will see everybody else here next time. Bye.
With Stephanie, story time virtually. We've got time and plenty of stories, talking stories.